All right, well, let's get to it. We got a lot of news to get to. We're going to start out with some Boeing news, correct?
We are starting out with Boeing.
I'm leaving on a jet plane.
Okay, so Boeing, just briefly before we get to the main story, you know, it's whenever I work on Boeing, somebody texts me the latest incident of something falling off of Boeing, and then I have to add that to the story. So it's not the main part of this story, but just for fun and giggles and terror. United Airlines loses a tire after takeoff, second time in 4 months. Oops. Okay. I think I left. All right. A United Airlines flight departing from Los Angeles lost a tire during takeoff Monday. Its second Boeing aircraft to have lost a tire in 4 months. The Boeing 757-200 departed LAX around 7:16 a.m. and continued to its destination at Denver International Airport even after losing the tire, according to the FAA. The plane landed safely around 10:10 a.m. with no reported injuries on the aircraft or on the ground, United Airlines said in a statement. The wheel has been recovered in Los Angeles, and we are investigating what caused this event, United said. The company did not say which tire on the aircraft was lost. The plane had 174 passengers and 7 crew members on board, according to United. United and FAA said they would investigate what caused the tire to fall. This is the second incident involving a tire falling from a United aircraft midair in 4 months. So I guess they have redundancies for that because both times they were able to land the plane. But
Right.
That is not all that's going on with Boeing. Of course, in what may become an ongoing segment, we might add a Lost in Space segment. Despite indefinite landing delay, NASA insists Boeing Starliner crew not stranded in space. It might be my favorite denial of reality of all time from corporate flacks. And the Boeing spokespeople are even better on this. No, we're just running some tests. We're just, while they're up there, we're just running some tests.
That's like the Monty Python sketch with the dead parrot.
The dead parrot.
It's not dead. You just stunned him, right? He's stunned.
He's just stunned. He's stunned. He's sleeping. We've got Butch Wilmore, who is really like, I think his parents named him that, wanting him to be an astronaut.
Yeah.
Like, what else could you be with that name? Butch Wilmore, right? Worked out at the hardware
That's a great
store.
name. Yeah.
No, you almost have to be an astronaut. So they're stranded up there actually, we might cover that because Elon is taking swipes at them now with some justification, pointing out, well, you know, all these disasters are happening under a CEO with absolutely no engineering background. His degree is in accounting, the current CEO of Boeing. But a little bit of Boeing being brought to justice, not as much as the families want, but they have agreed to plead guilty in a felony for covering up the reality of the software changes that were made to the MAX and lying to the FAA about what the true nature of the software was. So Boeing agreed on Sunday to plead guilty to a felony charge of conspiring to defraud the federal government over 2 fatal crashes of the 737 MAX in 2018 and 2019, according to a late-night court filing. In the deal with the department outlined in part in the court filing, Boeing also agreed to pay a $487.2 million fine, the maximum allowed by law, and invest at least $455 million over the next 3 years to strengthen its compliance and safety programs. The company will be put on probation, supervised by the Federal District Court for the Northern District of Texas for 3 years. As part of the probation, the Justice Department will appoint an independent compliance monitor who will make sure that safety measures are in place and followed, submitting annual reports to the government. The company will face additional penalties if any of the terms are violated. The company's board of directors will also be required to meet with crash victims' families. Upon news of the settlement, Palmolive stock dropped 23%, as they will no longer be able to use it as a lubricant. Families of the victims who were briefed a week ago, that was a joke. Families of the victims who were briefed a week ago on the general outlines of the deal had said it did not go far enough. Paul G. Cassell, a lawyer for more than a dozen of the families, said they had sought an admission of fault in the deaths of 346 people who were killed in the crashes, which involved Boeing's troubled 737 MAX plane in Indonesia and Ethiopia in late 2018 and early 2019. The families had hoped for stiffer consequences for the company and its executives, including a trial. Now, just to interject, this is why Boeing took the plea, because in a trial, you'd have discovery and they'd have to release all their correspondence, and that is the last thing they want. So back to the article. The Justice Department acknowledged the family's position in its court filing on Sunday. In a separate document, the family said they will object to the deal and, quote, intend to argue that the plea deal with Boeing unfairly makes concessions to Boeing that other criminal defendants would never receive and fails to hold Boeing responsible for the deaths of 346 persons. Mr. Cassell said that the government's agreement with Boeing is clearly not in the public interest. Quote, this sweetheart deal fails to recognize that because of Boeing's conspiracy, 346 people died. Through crafty lawyering between Boeing and DOJ, the deadly consequences of Boeing's crime are being hidden, unquote. And as you all know, that is something I wholeheartedly agree with. Dennis Muhlenberg, the CEO at the time, should be in prison, along with several other Boeing executives. These people are the mayor in Jaws. They knew it was dangerous, and they let the people go in the water anyway. Boeing's decision to plead guilty does not provide immunity to any employees or corporate executives. That's good. And the deal does not protect it from charges that might come from other investigations, including one into a January 5th episode on Alaska Airlines in which a panel blew off a Boeing 737 MAX jet soon after the plane took off from the airport serving Portland, Oregon. Though the blowout did not cause any major injuries, all right, here's the nightmare fuel coming up now for anyone who's flying. The incident could have been catastrophic had it happened minutes later when the plane had reached cruising altitude and flight attendants and passengers were moving around the cabin. I'm just not going to think about that. All told, Boeing has spent about $20 billion because of the crashes, including fines, payments to families, reimbursements to airlines, and other costs stemming from a nearly 2-year grounding of the 737 MAX by the FAA. The Justice Department has faced competing pressures over how to punish the already struggling Boeing, one of the biggest U.S. exporters and a large employer among the government's top defense contractors. In 2023, nearly 40% of the company's revenue came from contracts with the U.S. government. 40%, folks. It also interestingly mentions, I didn't use this part of the article, they were, the last time Boeing pled guilty to a felony was in 1989. They were paying a former employee who was working at the Pentagon to steal documents so they could get a leg up on the competition in preparing their bids.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Interesting little footnote. While the complete details of the deal were not included in the public court filing on Sunday, Boeing is likely to obtain assurances from the government that a felony conviction will not hinder its government contracts, reducing the impact of the charge on the company's operations, said Mark Lindquist, a lawyer for the families of victims of the MAX 8 crashes, who now represents passengers on the Alaska Airlines flight. Those exemptions would be independent of the plea deal, he said. Quote, While many of us would have preferred a more vigorous prosecution, a guilty plea to a felony is a serious step up in accountability, Mr. Lindquist said. So this is kind of a mixed bag. It is nice to see them being brought under the heel of some kind of supervision just for the safety of the public. The fact that they're going to have some kind of outside supervision in their manufacturing processes, particularly given that Boeing just bought Spirit, their main supplier. Boeing spun off Spirit decades ago in the, great wisdom of privatization and juicing stock price and taking everything out in-house, basically putting it onto another company to do the expensive manufacturing and deal with the labor issues involved, and then offer them a very low price, which in turn squeezed Spirit, which is where a lot of these problems spin from. So now Boeing is reversing that process. They've reabsorbed Spirit. So it is very good that they're going to have some supervision, because I don't think anyone at this point trusts Boeing to oversee its own manufacturing processes. But yes, these executives should go to prison. I'm not an expert in this area. I've done a lot of research on this particular case. Overall, if they were going to prosecute the executives personally and pierce the corporate liability shield, I don't know that I would really have a problem with this settlement. And I don't think the families would either. I think their issue is really that these people are literally not just getting away with murder, they're getting away with mass murder. They're getting away with killing hundreds of people for profit. And if that was your family, I'm sure you'd feel the same way.
Well, yeah, and it's not just that, though. You also have to think of the consequences of them taking the plea deal, which then keeps a lot of the evidence secret. That's one of the big incentives for a corporation to plead guilty. If they go to trial, if they maintain they did nothing wrong, then it goes to trial, and then all of the evidence at that trial becomes public, which means anybody can access it. When you take a plea, that does not happen. Now, this is what happens when corporations and the government become inseparable. There should be some law that serves as an exception to that principle when the defendant in a criminal trial is not just a large corporation, but a large corporation with a virtual monopoly on air travel. Right. Like the public does. Okay, if you're going to plead guilty to criminality and you are in the business of taking people 30,000 feet into the fucking air, then you should not be allowed to have the evidence against you hidden from the public, even if you do take a deal, right? That's just something that you would think lawmakers might want to solve if they weren't bought and paid for. And on the fine end of it, look, I mean, that's a nice, cute little fine. But as the article points out, when 40% of your revenue comes from the government, to have to pay a fine back to the government, well, that's going to find its way back to you eventually.
Right. $20 billion is no joke, even for a company like Boeing.
No, but they'll make it back. They got Ukraine. They got the Ukraine war going.
Sure. In the end, their malfeasance cost them. This is not a case like, very famously, automakers will look at dangerous conditions and calculate whether it will cost more to fix it than to just pay out the lawsuits. And very often it's worth whatever number of people are going to die rather than the cost of fixing it. This is a case where it seems like the cost of this far exceeds whatever profit they might make or have made from cutting the corners that they did. $20 billion is significant, even for Boeing, even with government contracts. But I think it really is because on the one hand, you see this deference to wealth and status and power in that that was a statement from one of the lawyers, that anybody else would go to trial for murder, right? I mean, they murdered these people. They're literally getting away with murder. So you have that Well, they're aristocrats. They can't be. Why? If you're worried that Boeing, which is an important part of the American economy and supply chain, is going to go under, what does that have to do with prosecuting these executives? They've resigned at this point anyway. They're not even part of the company. Why don't you drag Dennis Muhlenberg into court and try him for fucking murder? They won't do that because he's too rich. They just won't go after members of that class.
Please clap.